Today on our 2016 Chevrolet Colorado, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Westin E-Series round Nerf bars in polished stainless steel, part number 23-4010. Now they're also available in black using part number 23-4015. So whether you're looking for an easier way to get in and out of your Colorado or just to add a nice look to it, our Westin E-Series steps are going to do a nice job. The curved ends of our Nerf bars are going to give it a really streamlined look to where it's not going to stop abruptly on the outside. These bars are going to be made out of a stainless steel. They're going to have a really nice polished finish to them that's going to complement almost any colored truck. Our Nerf bars are going to have a step pad at each entry point. So not only is the driver and passenger, but also the passengers in the back seat are going to have a secure footing. They're going to be about 21 inches long and about 3 inches wide, and they're made out of a durable plastic that's going to be fade and crack resistant. Now typically when we get in our Colorado, we're going to have to lift our leg rather high. It's almost about 24 inches off the ground. But now with our tube steps, we're only going to have to lift our leg about 14 inches off the ground, making it a lot easier to get in. Now this is a custom design, so the bars are going to fit the length of our cab on our Colorado, and it's going to come with all the necessary brackets and hardware. We're not going to have to do any kind of cutting or drilling in order to get them in. We simply just have to bolt a few brackets to the other side and then bolt our bars in place. So now that we've seen what they look like and gone over some of the features, let's show you how to get them installed. To begin our installation, we're going to start off on the driver's front. Now we're going to have this plastic cover that's going to be right behind the front tire on the bottom of the rocker panel here. We're going to need to remove it so we can get access to a couple bolts behind it. So we're going to have a few fasteners that are holding it in place. So we're going to grab a T15 Torx bit and we're going to pull those two screws out. And once we have those two bolts pulled out, we're just going to kind of pull that plastic panel away. And there are going to be a few clips that are holding it in place. And if they stick into the body and they pop out of the spot on the panel, that's all right, because we'll just pull them out and slide them back in place. So you can take a flathead screwdriver or a trim panel tool, and we'll just come underneath it and pop them out. Just want to be careful because we are extremely close to the paint that will show on our truck. So we can pop them out, and then we can just take them and slide them back into the slot on the plastic cover here. And we'll go ahead and set this aside for right now. So underneath that cover, we're going to have those two bolts I was talking about. We're right at the front here. So we're going to grab a 10mm socket, and we're going to pull both of those out. Now we're not going to be reinstalling these. We're going to replace them with some bolts from our kit. So in our kit, we're going to have a few of these button head screws and a black washer. We're going to want to make sure we put the washer in place. And these are going to be replacing the two bolts that we already pulled out. So let's get these loosely started. There's a weld nut on the other side of these bolts. So you want to make sure that it's actually threading in and you're not just pushing it through. And in our kit, they are going to give us an Allen key. You can use that to tighten up those bolts. Make sure they're nice and snug. So those two bolts are going to come through the frame here, and if we move back a little bit, we come to the inside of the rocker panel, we're going to have this large rubber plastic type plug, and it is going to have a hole right next to it. We're going to want to pull that plug out. You can take a flathead screwdriver or whatever we have available. We're going to pop that plug out, and then if we move to the inside of the frame and come up, we're going to find another plug that looks exactly like it with a hole just like it on the other side. We're going to want to pull that one out as well. We're going to grab one of the U-nuts from our kit. You'll notice it's going to have a section that's going to stick out and then a kind of a recessed section. You want the recessed section to be facing down or towards the outside. So we're going to start by sliding it into the large hole and then pushing it till it locks in, and that recessed section is going to line up with a smaller hole next to it. We're going to do that for the one on the bottom as well as the hole on the side of the frame. And just a quick tip, if you're having a little trouble pushing them in place by hand, you can actually just take a screwdriver and kind of pry it in the direction you want it to go to get it to start moving. And once you get it past a certain point, it is a little bit easier to move them. So with the front section prepped, I'm going to go ahead and put this plastic cover back in before we put any of the brackets in place, because it is going to make it a lot more difficult. So we'll just pop that back in and replace both the two torque screws that we pulled out. So we're going to go ahead and grab our front bracket now. And the way we're going to know it's going to be our front bracket is they are stamped and labeled. We're going to have a DF for driver's front. And when we put it in place, we want to make sure we have that little shelf kind of rolling towards the inside and this ear going towards the back. So we're going to have these two holes. These will line up with those two bolts that we put through. So we'll raise it into position. May have to kind of work it in there a little bit, but we're going to slide it over those two bolts and pull it out towards the outside of the car as much as we can. And then on the inside where those studs that we passed through, we're going to take a flat washer, a lock washer, and then we're going to secure our bracket with these two nuts. We're going to have that combination on each one of those studs. So right now we're just going to get everything loosely in place, just enough so the bracket won't fall. We still have a little bit of wiggle room for everything. And then you'll notice that the ears line up with those two U-nuts in the frame that we put in earlier. So we'll grab one of our bolts, a lock washer, and then the one going on the bottom, we're going to grab one of the larger flat washers. And this is why it's kind of important to leave everything somewhat loose. You want to be able to move things around so we can get bolts started. We don't want to tighten anything up too much right now. And then for the bolt that's going into the side of the frame, we're going to take another one of our bolts and lock washers, but this time we're going to use one of the smaller flat washers. Again, we're just going to get everything hand tight, just enough so that we know that the bolt's actually started. So just inside towards the middle of our truck, we're going to have our cab mount right behind our tire. Now we're going to want to pull that bolt out, so we can grab a 21mm socket and pull it out. Then we can grab our support bracket. Now it's going to be in kind of an L shape. We want the oblong hole here to go towards the outside, towards the bracket we just have installed, so it's going to sit like this. So we'll take our bolt, we're going to slide it through the bracket, then we're going to take one of the spacers that are in our kit, slide that over the bolt, and then we're going to put that plate washer that came off when we pulled the bolt out back on. Now we're just going to get this loosely threaded in again, just enough to hold it, but you want to make sure you can still move the bracket around. Now for our middle support mount, we're going to find our other body mount. It's going to be right about the middle of our cab. So we're going to go ahead and pull that bolt out as well. Now this one isn't going to require a spacer, but we'll find our center support, and again it will be labeled, it'll have a C on it. This time we're going to find the oblong hole. We're going to pass our bolt through that hole. We're going to loosely put that bolt back in, again just enough to keep the bracket from falling and moving around too much, but we want it to be snug enough to where it won't fall down or cause any issues. We're still able to move it. Now we can move to the back bracket. On the back, we're going to have plugs on the bottom of the rocker as well as the inside, just like we did on the front. We're going to want to pull both of those out. Now it's going to be a little bit different of a process and different hardware because we're not going to use U-nuts back here. Instead, we're going to be using these bolt plates. Just going to have a bolt welded to the plate, but we're also going to be using a pull wire because we want our bolt to come out that small hole, but as you can see, it's going to be really hard to get that angle down just trying to feed it in. So the trick here is we'll take our pull wire, we'll put a little bend in it. We're going to go in the small hole. We're going to reach up, grab our pull wire, and have it come out the larger hole. We're going to take our bolt and we're just going to loosely thread it on just enough so that it'll hold it. Then we can pull our pull wire as we feed the bolt into the frame, and it'll drop down. We can go ahead and remove that pull wire. I will let you know it is a little bit tough to pull these off, especially if you thread them on all the way. So you may only want to do a couple threads because they start to stretch out, and we have to do a total of 4 of these with this one pull wire. And then to make sure that that's not going to get pushed back up in the frame, they do give us these plastic washers. So I'm just going to kind of slide it onto my bolt just a little bit. That way, in case I do push it, I still have a little bit that's sticking out, and it'll prevent it from going all the way in the frame. So we're going to go ahead and repeat that process of fishing our bolt plate in and putting that plastic washer on for the one on the inside of the frame as well. So now we're going to grab our rear bracket, and again, it is going to be labeled. We'll have DR for driver's rear. And you'll notice that it's going to be in kind of a step shape as well. We're going to want to make sure that the cutout section, or the kind of voided area in here, is facing towards the inside. And you'll notice that on this top section we'll have an oblong hole and another one, and these two are going to line up with our bolts. So since we have these washers in place to keep our bolts from getting pushed back in, you're going to kind of have to work at it, either get the top one started and then kind of push this up, let it drop back down to get the bottom one in, or vice versa. But it is a little challenging to get these in place if both of them are fully extended. So that's why we only put the washer on part of the way on one of the bolts. And once we have it in place, again, we'll take one of our larger flat washers, slide it over one of the bolts, take a lock washer, slide it over, and secure it down with a nut. Again, we're only leaving everything just hand tight right now. I want to make sure we get all the hardware in place before we really tighten anything up. So we're going to go ahead and grab our driver's step. Now when we're looking at it, they're going to kind of have a U shape because they're going to curve in towards the ends. The way we're going to notice the drivers is that we're going to be able to read the Westin symbol on the step properly. Now if we look on the bottom right in the center, we're going to have a threaded hole. That's going to line up with our center support. So we can take our running board, we're going to line it up pretty close to that center, kind of have it support that bar a little bit. And then we're going to want to grab another one of the larger button head screws. It's going to have a lock washer and a flat washer with it. We'll go through our bracket, and we're going to want to line up the threaded hole that's in our board. And we're going to want to get at least a few threads started just so we don't have to worry about the board falling down. Get a few threads on there, make sure it starts tightening up. This is also why it's important to leave all the brackets loose. That way if we need to shift anything front and back, we still can. So now that center piece is holding it in place, and we can move to the front or back and get the hardware in place there. For the front and the rear, we're going to have a 1/2 inch bolt. We're going to follow that up with a 1/2 inch split lock washer and then a large flat washer. We're going to go through the bracket on the mounting location, and we may need to shift the running board back and forth because there's going to be a threaded hole in the inside. So we're going to want to line everything up, have our bolt go through so that we can get it started by hand and start threading it in place. We're going to repeat that for any remaining points. There should only be one more bolt on the front side that we need to put in. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to snug up all my hardware. For those small studs that I sent through with the flat washers and lock washers, I'm using a 10mm ratcheting wrench to tighten those up since there is a limited amount of clearance back here. Now for our bolts that are going into those U-nuts, we'll be using a 13mm socket to snug those up. And we'll come back with that 21mm socket and make sure we tighten up our body bolts. And for our 1/2" bolts that are going into our boards themselves, we'll be using a 3/4 inch socket. And then I'll use the provided Allen key to tighten up the button screw that's on our support in the center. I'm going to come back with a torque wrench and I'm going to torque all of the hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. Just make sure you repeat that for all the remaining hardware. So with the driver's side on and torqued, we're going to repeat that for the passenger side. That'll finish up your look at the Westin E-Series round Nerf bars, part number 23-4010 on our 2016 Chevrolet Colorado.